What happens when a young soldier dares to challenge centuries of silence? What happens when the chains of finance tremble beneath the roar of a new generation? Somewhere in the heart of Africa, in the red dust of Burkina Faso, a man stands. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. Not a banker, not a politician raised in marble halls, a soldier, a son of the soil. And he dares to do what few before him have even whispered, to reclaim $1.5 billion locked away in foreign banks, wealth that rightfully belongs to his people. For decades, Africa's riches flowed like rivers into distant lands: gold, oil, cotton, lives. But today, the tide turns. This is not just a story about money. This is a sermon about justice, about memory, about a continent remembering its name. If you believe Africa deserves to own her story again, hit that subscribe button and let's walk this path together. Because tonight, family, we speak not of debt, but deliverance. They said Africa forgot how to fight. They said our leaders had learned to bow, to sign papers written in Paris, London, Washington, and call it peace. But then came Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier with mud still clinging to his boots, a voice too young to sound that old. He didn't come from the palaces of the elite. He came from the barracks, from the rhythm of marching feet, from the hunger of a people tired of watching their sweat turn into someone else's profit. Burkina Faso, land of upright men. A place the world barely whispers about, yet whose name means dignity. And when Traoré took that name into his heart, something ancient awoke. He stood before his nation and said words that shook the still air. For too long, our gold has not been ours. Our reserves sleep in foreign banks while our people wake in poverty. Today, we take back what is ours. The crowd was silent. The kind of silence that listens. Old men wept softly. Young ones clenched their fists. Mothers pressed their hands together, whispering prayers that smelled of hope and fear. $1.5 billion. That was the number. Not just money, but the weight of decades of deception. Funds that should have built schools, paved roads, filled hospitals, instead locked away under the polite name of colonial arrangements. For years, African nations have been told to trust the system, a system built on contracts written in languages their grandmothers never spoke. A system that sent our minerals north and sent back debt south. But Traoré, he was not a man to wait for permission. He called his advisors, economists, soldiers, even elders. He said, "We will no longer beg for what belongs to us. We will demand it, and we will stand by that demand, even if the earth shakes beneath us." And the earth did shake. Across Burkina Faso, the people felt it. From the dry markets of Ouagadougou to the quiet villages near the border, people began to talk. Not of fear, but of freedom. Barbershops, churches, mosques. The talk was the same. He's doing what Sankara dreamed. He's doing what we prayed someone would do. In the capital, workers painted murals of Traoré with a lion's mane. Children began chanting his name at sunset, not like a politician's name, but like a promise. And deep in the ministries, where dusty files lay forgotten, officials dusted off the numbers, the accounts, the ledgers, the truth. Because when you say $1.5 billion, you're not talking about just currency. You're talking about generations of stolen tomorrows. Traoré's message traveled far, through Africa's radio waves, into Africa news headlines, across YouTube, and into the hearts of those who remembered Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah. It reached the diaspora, brothers and sisters in Harlem, Atlanta, London, who saw in him not a soldier, but a reflection of themselves, still fighting to reclaim a story interrupted by chains. Yet behind the applause, there were murmurs. Foreign banks called emergency meetings, Ambassadors sent cables. Economists warned he doesn't understand how global finance works. But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. He understood too well how it never worked for Africa. So he sent the first letter, official, signed, stamped. A demand for the return of Burkina Faso's reserves, held abroad since the days of colonial administration. The tone was calm. The message, unshakable. If we are free, then our money must also be free. And in that single line, a continent held its breath. Because this was not just a policy, it was prophecy. The world has always underestimated the quiet ones, the soft-spoken, the humble, the faithful. But when they rise like thunder after long drought. And that day, in the heart of Africa, the storm began to form. But when a lion roars for the first time, does the jungle listen, or does it attack? When you touch the money of empires, you don't just move numbers, you move nerves. And when Ibrahim Traoré sent that letter demanding the return of $1.5 billion, the world flinched. The silence did not last long. Within hours, the airwaves filled. Africa News led with breaking headlines. Burkina Faso demands repatriation of national reserves. The Western outlets followed, some cautious, others scornful. One commentator smirked, "A young soldier playing economist? This won't end well." Another warned, "Burkina Faso risks isolation." But the people, oh, the people, they were not afraid. In Ouagadougou, thousands gathered in Revolution Square, waving flags, holding up portraits of Sankara and Traoré side by side. They sang songs their grandparents sang when independence first arrived, the same melodies that once dared to dream of freedom. Women ululated, drums rolled like thunder, and chants rose through the dry heat. Africa for Africans, our gold, our land, our pride. Every chant was a sermon, every drumbeat was a declaration. Meanwhile, far away, in the shining towers of global finance, unease spread like wildfire. In Brussels, officials whispered of sanctions. In Paris, bankers drafted quiet warnings about regional instability. In Washington, analysts spoke in hushed tones, wondering what might happen if others, Mali, Niger, Guinea, followed suit. Because this was not just Burkina Faso's cry. This was a spark threatening to light the whole savannah. In private rooms, they asked each other, if Traoré succeeds, who's next? And that question carried fear. In Africa's corridors of power, reactions were divided. Some leaders offered support, cautiously, quietly, like men testing the water. Others looked away, unwilling to anger their partners. But the youth, from Dakar to Kinshasa, they were already marching, already chanting his name. Videos flooded social media. An old farmer in Ghana said, "That young man, he's got the courage our fathers had." A preacher in Lagos declared, "This is not rebellion, it's resurrection." And across the ocean, in Harlem, barbershops buzzed with talk. He's doing what Malcolm dreamed. Not just freedom of speech, but freedom of economy. It was as if the drums of the ancestors began to beat again. But while the streets rejoiced, boardrooms plotted. Western financial institutions began reviewing compliance risks. Aid programs suddenly froze. International envoys started to visit, smiling, shaking hands, but warning quietly, "This could isolate your country." To them, isolation was a threat. To Traoré, it was liberation. He stood before his cabinet, the national flag behind him, the people before him, and said, "We will not be slaves to numbers written in another man's book. If we must walk alone, we will walk proud." The applause that followed was not polite. It was defiant. And as night fell, a reporter asked an old man near the square, Aren't you afraid of what might happen if the world turns its back on you?" He smiled, his eyes bright under the streetlight, and said, "The world turned its back on us a long time ago. Now we are turning to ourselves." That night, candles lit up the streets, not in protest, but in prayer. A prayer that the courage of one would awaken the courage of many. Yet beyond those flickering lights, the storm gathered. Foreign investors began to pull back. A whisper turned into a rumor, and rumor into warning. Burkina Faso's reserves will not be released. Behind closed doors, powerful voices murmured the oldest threat in the book. "If you defy us, you will be made an example." And somewhere in the dark, a journalist wrote, "The age of quiet Africa is ending, but the price of her roar may be high." The world had taken notice. Some applauded, some trembled, and some began to prepare their counterattack. But as the cheers echoed through Ouagadougou, dark corridors in foreign capitals whispered, "He must be stopped. The empire never sleeps, and it only changes its clothes." Days after Ibrahim Traoré's declaration, the retaliation began. Quietly at first, like a breeze before the storm. Loans delayed. Contracts under review. International aid temporarily suspended. Soon the markets shuddered. The national currency dipped. Trucks at the borders slowed to a crawl. Fuel shipments were mysteriously rerouted. And the same voices that once laughed at Traoré now called him dangerous. Newspapers that praised democracy began to question it. Headlines spoke of instability, not independence. The message was clear: disobey and you will starve. But the people, refused to kneel. In the countryside, farmers shared what little grain they had. In the cities, families gathered each night to pray and sing songs of endurance. A mother in Bobo Dioulasso told a reporter, "They can take our bread, but they cannot take our breath." And yet, hunger came. Shops emptied. Prices soared. But so did pride. At the Friday mosque, the imam spoke softly, "Freedom always begins as famine." At Sunday service, the pastor echoed, "Our ancestors survived the ships. We will survive this." It was suffering, yes, but it was sacred suffering, the kind that purifies a people. Traoré knew the cost. He met with his ministers late into the night, maps on the table, reports in hand, the faces around him drawn with exhaustion. He said, "If we retreat now, they will teach our children that we were brave for a week. We must hold fast until courage becomes our new normal." And so they did. Men volunteered to guard borders. Women formed cooperatives to feed the hungry. Artists painted murals of Africa unchained, not as a dream, but as a prophecy. Across the continent, whispers turned into words, words into slogans, slogans into movements. From Niger to Mali, from Togo to Chad, people began to ask, "If Burkina Faso can stand, why can't we?" The fear that once kept nations divided began to dissolve in the fire of example. But for every spark of unity, there was a shadow of vengeance. Foreign intelligence briefings began to circulate. Whispers of destabilization and change of leadership. Strange visitors appeared at embassies. And as the sun set over Ouagadougou, one question filled the air. Would they let him live long enough to finish what he started? And as the dust settled, the question remained. Could this fire spread across the continent? News travels faster than bullets. And across the ocean, Africa's echo reached the ears of her children abroad. In Ghana, students raised posters reading, "One Africa, One Destiny." In Mali, generals whispered about creating a joint African bank. In Senegal, preachers said Traoré's name in the same breath as Sankara's. But in America, the story took on a rhythm of its own. In Harlem, old men at barber shops nodded, eyes glistening. He's one of us, just born on a different shore. Church choirs in Atlanta sang hymns for Africa's rising dawn. Community radio stations replayed his speeches with gospel undertones. Africa news anchors spoke with pride unseen for generations. For the first time in modern history, an African leader is rewriting the script. It was as if the drumbeat of the motherland had crossed the ocean, calling her children home, not in body, but in spirit. And yet, beyond the pride, there was unease. Older activists remembered how every black prophet who rose too high met the same fate. From Patrice Lumumba to Malcolm X, from Sankara to King, the pattern was too familiar. A voice in the pews whispered, "They don't let black men change the system. They let them inspire it. Then they silence them." Still, hope refused to die. In small gatherings across America, people prayed, "May God protect this young man. May he shield Africa's sons from those who fear their freedom." And somewhere between Harlem's gospel and Ouagadougou's drums, the spirit of two continents began to beat as one heart. The spirit of Harlem meets the heart of Ouagadougou. But will that unity last? Freedom like dawn is not a moment. It's a process. And after the darkness, the sky over Burkina Faso began to change. Talks started among neighboring nations, Mali, Niger, Guinea, about forming a West African monetary alliance, a system to replace the colonial CFA franc. For the first time, leaders discussed building their own African Reserve Bank, owned and governed by Africans themselves. It was bold, it was risky, but it was real. Traoré spoke to his people again. "They call us rebels, but rebels built every nation that breathes free today." He smiled, not as a man triumphant, but as one entrusted. He knew he might not see the harvest, but he was sowing the seed. And the people, they understood. They were ready to walk the hard road, the long road, the road of their ancestors, paved not with comfort, but conviction. In the schools, teachers began lessons on African history written by African scholars. In the markets, traders used local goods with pride. In the villages, elders told stories not of slavery, but of sovereignty. And beneath it all, one idea pulsed through the land. If we could take back our money, what else can we take back? This isn't the end of the story. It's the sound of Africa waking up. There comes a moment in every people's history when silence becomes sin. And for Africa, that moment has come. The story of Ibrahim Traoré is not just about a man. It's about a continent daring to remember that it was once the cradle of civilization, and can be again. It's about a generation that refuses to measure wealth in dollars, but in dignity. Some will say he is too young. Some will say he is reckless. But history has always been written by those who refused to wait for permission. As the sun rises over the Sahel, you can almost hear the ancestors whisper, "We have waited long enough." So let this message travel. From Ouagadougou to Chicago, from Accra to Atlanta, from the motherland to the diaspora. Africa is not asking for charity. Africa is demanding accountability. The world may not yet understand, but the ground beneath their feet is already shifting. For every dollar reclaimed, a spirit is redeemed. For every lie exposed, a child learns the truth. If you believe the story of Africa must be told by Africans, share this message. Leave a comment below. Do you believe the West will ever return what was taken? And to every son and daughter of the continent, remember this: no empire lasts forever, but every truth, once spoken, echoes eternally. This is not the end. It is the awakening. It is deliverance. It is Africa taking back her wealth and her soul.